Hey guys, Kazi here with Judd, and it's 3 days before the start of season one of Dragonflight, and we were prepared to make a very short video about the very minor changes to tank tuning, the fine adjustments. We've all been talking about how great tank tuning was, so we're ready for those kind of the last little tweaks. And it's not exactly what we're getting. So, Joe, why don't you go and read us what we got tonight?
So, tank specializations. We've been taking a long look at tank survivability as we prepare for the beginning of the Dragonflight Season 1. Yes, that's about as long a look as they can take, as we are 3 days before the beginning of it. In general, we found that the new talent trees that have introduced a lot of power across all classes and specializations. Talents that were once exclusive through the systems, like talent rows, legendaries, or covenants, can now be equipped at the same time.
We're really hoping that Blizzard didn't just realize this was happening.
Yeah, I mean, of course. Like you made entire new talent systems. You combined it all. You put it all together. You did this. Through
This
our
is
recent testing, we've determined that damage done to tanks needs to be increased. While we're thrilled that players are enjoying playing tanks in Dragonflight, heaven forbid we take that away, and we want the role to be healthy. There are some negative effects that can come from tanks being too strong.
excessive amounts of fun.
Yes, we want healers to play a key role in keeping tanks alive, unless you're playing a Blood Death Knight. And tanks shouldn't be able to easily solo large portions of encounters after the rest of their group have died. Now, that's the one portion of sentence in this entire paragraph that I actually wholeheartedly agree with. It's kind of silly. Um, we've seen the scenario just earlier today on my fresh 70 paladin, running through my first mythic zero, and I do like a triple pull, and my entire party dies, and I'm sitting there at full health, completely under geared, and not having an issue with it. So yes, tanks are strong. I know I've been happy about where tanks sit. We've been talking about the balance of tanks being great. Tank just tanks feeling good. Playing tank feels pretty good. We all feel really strong, like for the strongest ever in like a season one with low stats and all of that.
All
Um,
right, so let's ruin the fun.
yes. So anyway, so what they did, let's actually talk about the change. So we're adjusting the damage reduction passives of all the tanks, effectively increasing the damage that tanks take by 10%. We think that tanks will still feel powerful after these changes, and it will result in a more balanced gameplay experience for all players. So everyone's going to have more fun because of these nerfs. And
So
literally, they
here,
just took 10% off the top of every single tank. Go ahead, Kazi.
pretty much. So here's the thing that we'll say is that the thing that they think tanks are still going to feel strong. Feeling is something that is best known by testing it and getting your players' feedback on it. This is going to be a change that is a very large course change without getting tested at all before the season goes live. So color me a little bit skeptical that they're just going to take 10% off everyone and everything is going to be perfectly. But so kind of to touch on the one special case here, pretty much all the passives got hit by exactly 10%, which were just 10% flat damage reductions, with the exception of Warrior. So Warrior's passive damage reduction was only at 5% to begin with because their defensive stance had 20% of it. So they took away the 5% from the passive and then reduced the defensive stance by an additional 5%. The thing with that, though, is that at the lower levels at least, warriors are spending a significant portion of time in battle stance instead of defensive stance. So if they're in battle stance, they're only actually going to be losing 5% of their damage reduction. So the damage increase to warriors is not as severe. And this is for the tank that's already the tankiest at reducing damage. So that don't get me wrong, at the very highest levels when we're starting to push those really high keys, that we're going to be in defensive stance for the majority of them. But if you're going into a pull with shield wall up, you don't also need to be in defensive stance. So there's going to be periods of time where warriors are not hit as much by this damage increase as some of the other tanks, and that's pretty hilarious given the current state of tuning.
Yeah, and it's one of the tanks that's just been nerfed and nerfed and nerfed and nerfed throughout this entire process, throughout the entire beta. And now, here in the last hour, they're actually the one that's taking the least hit.
Right.
Is, I guess, ironic, you might say. I don't know.
Yeah.
Either way, these are 12th hour changes, and to see just a flat 10% damage reduction across all tanks is a little startling, I guess. It just felt the whole roll was too strong, and instead of tweaking each tank in its own special way, just chopping 10% off of the passives of all of them and call it good. I guess this is the way that tank tuning is going to be going right into season one, and I'm super curious about how this is going to affect these tier lists that have been out there and all that, and how it's going to affect the race for the highest keys,
Yeah,
and what the meta is going to look like.
so it seems like overall warriors are probably going to be the least affected. Blood Death Knight is up there pretty high too, with them not being affected, with one major caveat is that since blood is still going to be able, if blood goes from 100 to 5% and has the time to heal back up quickly, then they're not affected. If they go to 5% or 15%, it doesn't necessarily matter for them. The question is going to be, at what point does that 10% damage reduction going away cause them to now be one shot at key levels that other tanks want to be one shot at? Because that is always kind of blood's like hard limit, is when you get to the point where it's like, yep, I just cannot survive that hit, so I cannot tank any higher key. And you're gonna probably run into that a little bit sooner than you otherwise would have. And whether or not that's before, say, the keys warriors can tank is going to kind of be one of the big questions with blood now.
Right, and the sky is not falling necessarily on the entire roll. It is just a 10% hit to damage taken, but it's just strange to see that, seeing as how this affects each tank a little bit differently. We talked a lot about in a previous video about the 40% reduction to 40% damage increase from creatures and 40% HP nerf, and how that affect different tanks differently, because there's different types of healing that tanks do. Well, the tanks that scale off of damage taken, and that's how they do their healing. Hey, Death Knights, already a pretty strong tank. Less affected by this than, let's say, Paladin. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it affects them in these big sweeping ways that it did for that big 40%, increase. These aren't as big of changes. But it's so interesting here at the end of like I said, just 3 days before launch to see such a big change like this. I do think this does affect the tier list. I just think it makes Warrior that much stronger going into the season. I just think you're going to see a lot more players on the Warriors now. Not going to lie.
Yeah, and we're even talking most about Mythic Plus, but even when you start getting into the raid scene and you start looking at the different tanks, so Demon Hunter, you're probably going to have a Havoc Demon Hunter in there, probably going to have a Resto Druid, probably going to have a Windwalker Monk and a Holy Paladin. So really the only buff that you're missing at that point is Warrior, because DPS Warriors don't appear to be in great shape. So if you have those other buffs covered, you may be ending up looking at double Warrior compositions or Warrior Death Knight compositions based on how things shake out, which isn't necessarily a huge surprise, but at the same time, it's a little disappointing.
Yeah, and this is really just thinking about how this is going to affect the top level. All in all, a 10% touch to all of these classes as far as like really affecting this tier list. And oh my gosh, is this tank now SSS tier? And you're going to see it more than anything else. Probably not. But yeah, there's just a few things on where is that line where tank survivability versus party survivability is really going to matter. And in which case, can a Brewmaster Monk live before your party is going to die? And if that's the case, then you're going to take a Brewmaster Monk because they do the most damage. That's going to be like you're going to see the highest keys done on a Brewmaster Monk. And that's assuming that threshold even really is doable by just swapping out the tank, right? Like you may see that be stagnant at the top where all the tanks are hitting that top key level. And it's really more about party survivability than it is about tank survivability. And maybe them being able to make an adjustment like this and just chop 10% off the top, maybe that just shows how big either A, they overshot on tank tuning to begin with. Maybe they felt like everything, like if you're a real Blizzard apologist, maybe everything was so perfectly tuned that they knew at the very last minute they could just top 10% off the top of everything and everything would fall into its perfect spot, right? That's just next level thinking 3 steps ahead.
Yep, we have complete faith that that is exactly what Blizzard was doing.
Yeah. It's just ridiculous. Yeah, it looks ridiculous, but
Yeah. So the only other tuning that came in for tanks besides the 10% directly off the top is going to be on Havoc Demon Hunter. Or sorry, not on Havoc, on Demon Hunter. So it's another hit to the hunt. This time, just the healing, as well as healing from Charred Warblades. Um, and then Fodder of the Flames heal effect is no longer able to crit, which it was apparently doing before when it wasn't supposed to.
yeah, Demon Hunter was already one of those tanks where your health bar was under attack constantly, and you're having to kind of heal back up through that drain tanking style. And you just wonder if taking 10% more damage on top of that now like pushes that to a level in which it's you're gonna feel it 10% harder next week, and that adding plus the Mythic Plus levels on top of that, it's gonna be interesting to see how the community feels about this change here at the last minute.
Yeah, and Demon Hunter, even in the Mythic Plus meta, both Mythic Plus and Raid, is hurt by the fact that Havoc is in such a good space. Because you're probably not going to bring a Vengeance Demon Hunter to Mythic Plus if you're also bringing a Havoc Demon Hunter. It just doesn't really make sense unless you don't really have a choice. So that the fact that Havoc has continued to be nerfed, but even this one is more aimed at their survivability than at their damage. And there's a couple other DPS classes, kind of those outliers on survivability that got knocked down a little bit too. So Havoc's still going to be in a great place, and that's probably going to leave Vengeance on the outside looking in of most of the really high push groups.
Doesn't mean delete your Vengeance Demon Hunter. Like I said, don't overreact. Let's see how this plays out. I think you can still pick the class that you enjoy playing, and you are going to receive a buff just being familiar with the class and not re-rolling to some FODM class. Like, you go pick up Warrior, although apparently they're just so easy anyone can play it. So I guess just everyone re-rolled a Warrior, and
Jed says that about any tank that I can play.
yeah.
Any class that Kazi can play must be easy enough for anyone to play. So
Yeah, it must be. Anyway, that's all we got for this one. Thanks so much for supporting the channel, everybody. This has been a lot of fun making these videos. We're going to keep it up, and we'll see you in the next one.